possible.
Tonight on Talking Politics, Mayor Michelle Wu campaigned on using a different approach to tackle the addiction and homelessness crises at Mass and Cass. But another round of clearing tents and residents from the area is a reminder that big problems persist. So a year and a half into her tenure, how exactly does Wu's response differ from her predecessors? And is it working? We'll dig into that ahead. But first, CNN is taking heat ahead of its first major event of the 2024 presidential race, a primetime New Hampshire town hall with Donald Trump. Criticism and skepticism has poured in over the move, including the network's decision to, quote, treat Trump like any other candidate, as VP and political director David Chalian told Vanity Fair. Of course, Trump is not just any other candidate. He shattered norms throughout his 4 years in the White House and ended his tenure by refusing to accept Joe Biden's victory, paving the way for an ugly and an unprecedented insurrection at the Capitol. Then again, Trump is also the GOP frontrunner, and not covering him isn't an option. So if CNN is poised to get it wrong next week, how can the rest of the media get it right? Joining me to weigh in are Lylah Alphonse, the editor of the Boston Globe's Rhode Island and New Hampshire bureaus, Joanna Weiss of Northeastern University and Politico Magazine, and Dan Kennedy, a professor of journalism at Northeastern University. Thank you all for being here. Lylah, do you think CNN is getting it right by holding this event at this time with the philosophy they've articulated?
So if they treat Trump, the candidate, the way they were treating him towards the end of his presidency, lower thirds fact-checking as he went, being really skeptical, pushing back, analysis that talked about what wasn't accurate, then I think they're closer to getting it right. He's the former president. What he says is newsworthy. Him holding a town hall as the front-running candidate in New Hampshire is newsworthy. The thing about it is, even it's a national story in New Hampshire, it's a local story. It's happening right in the backyard. So there's a lot of news around it beyond just Trump, the candidate. And so I think I'm going to be a little bit skeptical, and I'm going to wait and see how they actually end up covering it. But treating him just the same way they treat Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or even Vivek Ramaswamy, I think that's maybe not quite the way to go.
Okay, Joanna Weiss, what's your take?
I think part of the original sin of the 2016 campaign was that the networks, the cable networks in particular, treated him as both more and less than a regular candidate. I mean, you know, on the one hand, there was this disbelief that anyone would actually want to vote for him, and I think that was an undergirding of a lot of media coverage. This can't happen. I mean, remember the New York Times, you know, probability ticker. This could never happen.
The needle, yeah.
On the other hand, he got so much more access than another candidate might because he is an entertainer, and he was entertaining. So he would call into CNN from his jet, and he would be, you know, anytime he wanted airtime, he would get it, which amounted to amazing amounts of free advertising. And at the old debates, he would stand in the center of the stage, and he would just hurl out insults. He was not treated like an ordinary candidate. So to treat him like an ordinary candidate, as CNN intends apparently to do, would be to cut him down to size in a way that I think might be actually useful. I support their decision.
Dan Kennedy?
I think this is a mistake. And I think there are ways that this could have been handled that wouldn't have been a mistake. This is the inaugural event of the campaign for CNN. And how are they opening it? With Trump alone on the stage. I think that at least for the first, they do have to treat him like any other candidate. I agree with what Lylah and Joanna said. They can't ignore him. But for the inaugural event, have him up there, have Ron DeSantis up there, Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, Nikki Haley, you know, make it all the candidates and all of the possible candidates. Instead, they're giving him this platform. You know, Chris Licht, who is the new head of CNN, he isn't new anymore, he's been there for a year. I've tried to cut him some slack because the Jeff Zucker era was just so awful. And Licht has done some things that, he said some things that I like. Less opinion, more news. He's done some things I haven't liked, like get rid of Brian Stelter, their former media reporter. But this is just a mistake. If you're going to have one-on-ones, do it later on. Begin with everybody so that they're all on the same footing.
I want to stay with you for a second. Since you're the most skeptical, is there anything that the network could do during the broadcast, or that Caitlin Collins, who's going to be moderating it and was pretty tough on Trump as CNN's White House correspondent. Is there anything they could do that would make you change your mind? For example, as Lylah said, real-time fact-checking in the lower thirds, or aggressive moderation on Collins' part?
Well, the questions are supposedly coming from the audience, not from Caitlin Collins. Now, the questions will be screened ahead of time, so I suppose they can pick the audience questions that get at Trump's various legal problems, the insurrection, and all those other things. And that would at least be an improvement. But you know what? No matter what they ask him, Trump is going to benefit from this quite a bit at the expense of these other people who are also running against him.
I see you wanting to follow up.
Well, it depends on what CNN's other programming is, and I don't know that I haven't seen a full programming plan. I mean, I agree with you. If he was the only person who got this treatment and everyone else had to be part of a panel, that would certainly be problematic.
He's the first, though.
He's the first. Well, you sequence them in, you know, and maybe you sequence them differently, and you have Asa Hutchinson first and then Trump. I mean, okay, you could do it that way, but in terms of just giving everybody the same treatment and saying you're not special just because you're specially entertaining. You have to submit to the same kind of questioning from the students in the audience or that from the moderator. Look, now the real-time moderation and that real-time fact-checking is going to be a challenge. It's a challenge in every circumstance, but certainly under Trump. So I think that's where CNN has particular pressure for this event because he's Trump.
We keep saying that this is the first event. This is the first event CNN is choosing to cover. Nikki Haley has held multiple town halls in New Hampshire. Ron DeSantis, who is not yet running but just earned the endorsement of the House Majority Leader somehow, he's held events there in the same venue that Trump has held events in. Tim Scott has held events there. This is the first one that CNN is choosing to give a national platform to. So I think that that's a significant choice. I do wonder whether that's a business decision in a lot of ways.
It's got to be,
you know,
right?
You're going to bring in the viewers. In the latest polling in New Hampshire, Trump is still the front runner, followed closely by DeSantis, who has not yet declared, and followed in third place by Governor Sununu. So Nikki Haley doesn't really make the cut yet. I understand that decision is based on what viewers want to see, but I think it's an interesting choice to kick off this season in their programming.
Are you trying to suggest that Asa Hutchinson would not be boffo at the box office, Lylah?
I'm thinking that maybe not.
We should probably note that Trump, according to his campaign, sources in his campaign, this is a way for him to goad Ron DeSantis, it seems, to show that he's courageous enough to stand on the debate stage or stand on a town hall stage with CNN in charge, CNN who he vilified throughout the course of the last campaign and his presidency, who he mocked as fake news, and to take questions, to potentially be treated in an aggressive way. Also, I want to just come back to the point you made about how challenging it will be to fact check in real time. Even though we all lived through it, it can be easy to forget all the things that Trump did differently as president. One thing he did differently was show a wanton disregard for the truth that puts other politicians to shame. And I think we've got a graphic ready. The Washington Post kept count of all of Trump's false or misleading claims over his 4 years in office, and their tally was just over 30,500. So that's difficult. I want to actually come back to the question of the insurrection, if we can, and how that should be addressed at this event and also moving forward in coverage. I know you're going to be covering him in the state as he works his way through. It bears noting that Trump hasn't tried to just move on from January 6th. He has actually embraced the insurrection and made it a core of his current political brand. Let's take a look at how he kicked off his campaign in Waco a few weeks ago. This is a song that he led off with a song that he created along with people who are incarcerated over their roles in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Let's take a look.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That song tells you a lot because it's #1 in every single category. #2 was Taylor Swift. #3 was Miley Cyrus. So we have our moment, and that tells you that our people love those people. They love those people.
One of you, maybe more than one of you, might have been you, Joanna, said, yeah, you got to cover him like any other candidate, and that's the most effective way to approach this. But it bears emphasizing that he is not like any other candidate because he's both the front runner in his party, past president, but also someone who refuses to be bound by the laws and conventions that undergird American democracy. And I'm hoping that we can talk a little more about how the press can deal with that problematic part of his identity moving forward. Why don't you kick off and then we'll go down the line.
When you say that he's embracing the insurrection, he literally is. After his appearance last week, he went to the Red Arrow Diner where he literally hugged a woman who said she had served time for participating in the insurrection. He signed backpacks. People showed up in costume. He reiterated over and over that these were good patriots. So I don't think there's a way to avoid the question of the insurrection in covering him. And I'm sure, I can't say I'm 100% sure, but it likely will come up, if not next week, then sometime soon. I don't know how you can cover him like any other candidate when no other candidate has been in that position.
Well, look, among other things, the insurrection, embracing the insurrection is a political decision that he is making. This is a political choice he's making. He is appealing to a certain segment of his base that is not going away, and they will never go away. There's clearly nothing that he can do that would make them go away. Now, how it plays with the rest of the country that has had 4 years of Trump and then a few years of Biden and is settling and is, I think, looking at this race with a slightly different lens than when he was a new guy who had never served in office and hadn't done all the things that he'd done. You know, that's a risk and a calculation that he's taking. And of course, it's part of the story. And I would expect that Caitlin Collins would interrogate him on it and get him on the record about what would happen the next time he ran for office. If he, you know, if what would happen with the election results the next time.
Yeah, that's a huge question, right?
That's part of the story.
We have to cover him as a legitimate candidate for the Republican nomination. It doesn't mean that we cover him like any other candidate. You know, we're talking about, well, he's chosen to embrace the insurrection. Let me just say, and I mean this in the lay sense of the term, not the legal sense of the term, he incited the insurrection. And I mean,
it's a good reminder. Thank you.
And as we are having this discussion, 3 of his fans were just convicted of sedition and are going to serve long prison sentences as a result of that. So we're talking about somebody who has shown all the signs of being willing to win the election through authoritarian means, through illegitimate means, and that has to be front and center in the way we cover him at every step of the way.
Joanna, you get the last word here.
Nobody doesn't know this. Nobody who lives in America, even people who pay only tangential attention to politics, know and understand Donald Trump. And I think that was probably true in 2016 as well, and in 2020. The rest of the calculation might be different. Everyone has now lived again through these last 7, 8 years. So, again, this all feels to me like an argument for covering Donald Trump like any other candidate, not giving him any degree of special treatment, whether that's, you know, kid glove treatment that he got in 2016, or we got to push him away and treat him like a pariah treatment. He's a politician. Treat him like one.
All right. Joanna Weiss, Lylah, Alphonse, Dan Kennedy, thank you. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, last week, the city of Boston delivered a message to about 120 people living in an encampment on Atkinson Street in the area known as Mass and Cass. Residents there were told to remove any tents and other structures they've been living in and to, quote, vacate the area as soon as possible. They were also told they could ask the city for help, including shelter, substance abuse treatment, and relocation back to where they came from. If that sounds familiar, it's because people living at Mass and Cass have seen their homes cleared away before, including in 2019 under then Mayor Marty Walsh. in 2021 under then acting Mayor Kim Janey, and in January 2022 under current Mayor Michelle Wu. For those of us who don't live or work at Mass and Cass, seeing these scenes repeated again and again can create a sense that not much is changing. But Mayor Wu has made a point of saying that despite continued challenges, things at Mass and Cass are getting better. Here she is late last year in an interview with WBUR.
It is 80%, 90% even better than where we started a year ago, where people were dying on the streets and there were fires and rampant diseases spread from a rodent infestation and just widespread human trafficking in structures that we didn't really know what was going on inside.
Of course, Wu has also called more than once for more help from the state when it comes to Mass and Cass, suggesting that any progress hasn't gone quite as far as she'd hoped. All of which raises a few big questions. When it comes to Mass and Cass, what specifically is Wu doing differently than her predecessors? Is it working for the people living on the streets, but also the homeowners and business owners nearby? And what else could the state be doing that it isn't? Joining me to discuss are my GBH News colleague, Tori Bedford, and former senior editor of the Bay State Banner, Yawu Miller. Thank you both for being here. Tori, in that message that was delivered to the people living on Atkinson Street, I felt like I could sense the city trying on the one hand to strike a tough note while also trying to be empathetic, offering services that people could avail themselves of. How did the residents that you spoke with react to this clearance?
So technically, they don't have a city ordinance, so there's no law that compels anyone to, not put up a tent. So they're emphasizing that it's a voluntary choice to remove your tent from the encampment. But during the actual clearing, workers and people employed by the business district were helping people, but there was a rush. I mean, people were saying, wow, they're making us do this really quickly. A couple of guys were just sitting on the street. They were told, go over to Southampton. There's a police presence.
Shelter near there.
Yeah, just Southampton Street. Just go to the other street. Just clear out of the street. We'll do this, And it has felt, I think, like, you don't have to take your tents down, but we're going to send out this notice that says tents need to be removed. The police will be overseeing and enforcing it, and we will be heavily encouraging you via one-on-one conversations to do that. So it didn't really feel maybe like a choice in the moment.
Can you explain that dynamic to me? Because I don't understand, given the language of the communication that, again, I saw in your tweet, it wasn't presented there as something voluntary, right? It was presented as, we are doing this. If you have a tent or if you have another structure that you've been living in, it needs to go and you need to move somewhere else.
I guess just technically, legally, the city would likely say that it is voluntary and that it's a policy and not, they don't have an ordinance.
Okay, gotcha.
So you have to go, and you said that they needed to vacate as well, which, was implied, but that you can stay. You can stay, you just can't put up a tent. You can have a tarp, but it can't have sides. It raises a lot of questions about what a dwelling is, and what housing is, and what is an encampment. You don't have to leave, but you cannot have any kind of entrenched encampment or tent in the area.
One more question for you quickly before I finally bring you in, Yawu. Were the people who were affected by this on Atkinson Street, are they people who you've seen living in the neighborhood over the past several years, or are they mostly newcomers to the neighborhood?
There's a mix. I mean, every day they do a count. There's different numbers. I think a lot of those people who are out there right now are receiving services, which is why people come to the area: medical, physical health, substance use health, help, all of these different services that are provided in the area. Overnight, I think right now, despite this push for enforcement, a couple days ago, as of Wednesday, there were 16 tents that came back up on Atkinson. I saw someone who I have been seeing there for 4 years, and she just got into the Roundhouse, and now she's, the Roundhouse is
the former hotel right there.
That will be shut down as of July, so she's on a waiting list for temporary, transitional housing at the moment, but I'm not sure what her next step will be, and she's been trying to get services for a while. I spoke to a man named John who's been there for 2 years. There are people, John said, that just have fallen through the cracks, where there are other people who have just come in. Maybe they've been there for a few months, maybe a few weeks, and some of those people might receive services. So it feels a little disorganized at the moment to some of the people living there.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned a moment ago, these are not the only people who are living in the neighborhood. There are homeowners around there. There are business owners who are operating there. How do they feel, broadly speaking, about what's been happening in the neighborhood under Mayor Michelle Wu?
I think people have sort of mixed feelings. They want people to get services. They want people to get the temporary housing, but they don't want, I mean, nobody wants the concentration in their own neighborhood. And I think people in the who live in the Mass and Cass area have sort of borne the brunt of this for the city and also for the region, because people who are coming in here are coming from all over Massachusetts as well as all over New England.
And that was a big part of Mayor Wu's pitch, right? When she was a candidate, saying that she was going to go with a hub and spoke model where maybe you'd see a lot of services still centralized down there, but they'd be dispersed through the metro area, correct?
That's what, well, throughout the city of Boston, yes. And she's also, since then, asked the state to locate more services outside of the city of Boston, which is, I think, a fair ask.
Has the state done that, by the way?
I mean, we haven't seen much movement. I don't know exactly what they've done as far as, citing services outside of Boston, but it doesn't seem to be making a dent in what's happening in Boston. And also, people in Roxbury are saying that most of what is being proposed in and directly around Roxbury. And that's proposed by the city. Pine Street Inn has the Morrissey Boulevard property that they were trying to move forward, and they've just faced some really stiff headwinds there. So,
Tori, can you make sure that I understand correctly what Mayor Wu has done that's different from her predecessors when it comes to providing services that people living around Mass and Cass might want to access? What is she doing differently there?
You talked about the hub and spoke model, and I think when we look right now across the country, every mayoral administration is going through this huge shift in how they approach this issue. So you look at LA, they're hoping to house 4,000 people, I think 1,700 in the next year, right? And that's going to involve putting people in hotels. That's one part, that's a step in the process. I think what Mayor Wu is doing that is different than Mayor Marty Walsh, for example, is that, during Operation Clean Sweep, there was no plan for the next step. So it was these tents are dangerous, these tents are a nuisance, get them out of here, a police sweep, right? She's trying to think about each step of the way along a process. We are going to see right now a lot more families coming in. We're going to have a big influx of immigrants coming in terms of what the state is contributing. I know they're having ongoing discussions about Long Island and Shattuck, but those are also steps along a process, right? You may stay at a shelter at Long Island, but you don't want to be in a shelter forever. You don't want to be maybe in it at all. You want to be in temporary housing, which transitions to permanent housing. You talk about job placement.
And the Long Island conversation feels like it's been going, it has been going on
right.
for years and years.
But even if we just got that, it would just be one step along a process. So I think that, the state just contributed, I think Healy administration just gave $1.7 million for the Mira Coalition to help with immigrant families coming in. Family homelessness and young LGBTQ homelessness is one of the biggest issues that's been rising in recent years. I think it was 10% since the previous year. And it's something that they're going to have to work collaboratively together on, because it's not going to, you can't just address the community that's there right now. There will be more people coming in, and so it's about moving people along a pathway. I think that's significantly different.
Just to make sure that we give the Wu administration credit for changes they may have made, am I right that the push for, remind me of the term of art, low threshold housing that you can get, temporary housing, even if you are not sober, that's something that she's expanded, right?
Yes, yeah, she has. I think nearly 600 people have passed through those low threshold housing sites now, according to the city. And it's something that I think is significantly different because it allows people a place to go for a bit of time to get in touch with a caseworker, to be offered opportunities. She has done things that we have not seen here or in many, many other cities. And I think she's incorporated a lot of harm reduction tactics and harm reduction nonprofits and organizations, and that feels very revolutionary when we think about challenging the status quo of how cities deal with homelessness.
And it's effective. It's proven to be effective, those kinds of policies.
Can you just talk through, for viewers who may not fully understand what harm reduction entails, what kind of policies are we talking about when we use that phrase?
Well, essentially decriminalizing a lot of the things that people who are suffering through substance misuse disorders, a lot of things that they do, in many cases.
That include drug possession, for example?
Yeah. So basically, keeping people safe while they're in the throes of addiction, It goes as far as safe injection sites, those sorts of not interventions, but those sorts of strategies so that people can get health care. They can do things they can do what they do in a safe way, so they're not going to die on the street. Also the low threshold housing where people can go in if they're not clean. And keeping people off the street reduces their chances that they're going to engage in illegal activity, the chances that they're going to be victimized or that they're going to victimize other people, and it gives people basically a better shot at getting clean.
You brought up we brought up collectively the law enforcement piece. You mentioned Operation Clean Sweep, which I believe, if I recall correctly, was initiated after a Suffolk County jail staffer was attacked, and there was a heavy law enforcement presence there.
32 arrests or something. Yeah.
Yawu, do the neighbors that you talk to who live by the people who are living on the street at Mass and Cass, do they want to see more law enforcement activity, including prosecution of people who are dealing drugs, which is something I remember former Governor Charlie Baker calling for when Michelle Wu was asking for more state help? Is that something they'd like to see ramped up? I
think it's mixed. There are some people who really do want to see that, but I think on the whole, people in Boston and people in Roxbury in particular have for years been advocating for non-criminal interventions. You might recall in the year 2000 there was a ballot question that would basically give judges the power to give people the option to go into treatment instead of incarceration. It was called treatment on demand. Black people overwhelmingly voted in favor of that. The rest of the state rejected that ballot measure. That was when addiction was seen as a black problem. Now that people are looking at it, seeing white people addicted as well, I think the overall statewide, attitude toward that has changed.
Seems
obviously.
like it's transformed.
Yeah.
Tori, very quick question for you. We got about 15 seconds for you to answer this. Mayor Michelle Wu saying late last year, 80 or 90% better than it was a year earlier. Does that jive with what you've seen?
I think so, but it's important to remember that it's not linear. So again, we're dealing with each step of this process and getting people into a place where they can be treated like human beings and find jobs and housing, and that requires so many steps and changes along the way. I do think that there have been a significant number of people helped, and I think there are more opportunities than there were before, but there are also, it's just not linear. We'll see what happens, I guess. It's not linear.
Okay. Tori Bedford, Yawu Miller, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week. And please tell us what you think. The email's talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. Or you can find me on Twitter @ReillyAdam. For now, thank you for watching and good night.
This is my half-brother Sam.